He commanded armies that shook the world. His word could move nations, his armies thundered across continents, and his crown gleamed with the weight of empires. But beside him stood someone with no army, no title, no throne. She commanded only her voice, her charm, and her mind. Yet in the end, it was her whispers that proved more dangerous than any army. He was Suleiman the Magnificent, the sultan who ruled millions, the shadow that fell across Europe and Asia. But beside him stood Hürrem Sultan, a concubine, a woman stolen from her homeland, who rose from chains to power. To the world, he was the conqueror, but in the silence of the palace, she was the one who conquered him. Was it his crown that shaped history, or her hidden power behind it? Was the fate of the empire decided on the battlefield, or in the quiet of a woman's chamber? Her rise was not just rare, it was impossible. And once she entered the Sultan's world, nothing in the Ottoman Empire would ever be the same. The Ottoman Empire, vast, unstoppable, glittering with gold and drenched in power. Its borders stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, from the coastlines of North Africa to the heart of Mesopotamia. Kingdoms trembled, princes bowed, and empires collapsed beneath the march of its armies. At the center of this thunder stood one man, Suleiman the Magnificent. To his enemies, he was a storm. To his people, a lawgiver. His name echoed across Europe with awe and fear alike. But not all battles were fought with cannons and swords. Behind the towering walls of Topkapi Palace, another empire existed, one hidden from the gaze of soldiers and kings. It was a world wrapped not in steel, but in silk. A golden prison where laughter masked rivalry, and beauty was a weapon as sharp as any blade. This was the Sultan's harem, a cage gilded with jewels, where women were treasures to be displayed, rivals to be destroyed, and pawns in a game of survival. Here, every glance was a test. Every whisper carried the weight of betrayal. And while the outside world saw Suleiman at the height of glory, inside his palace, another power was silently rising. And from within that cage of shadows and whispers would emerge one woman whose influence would outshine them all, Hürrem Sultan. She was not born to silk or crowns. Hürrem's story began far away, in the cold winds of Eastern Europe. She was a daughter, a dreamer, a girl with no empire in her veins. Until one day, her world was torn apart. Raiders stormed her village, chains bound her wrists, and she was dragged across foreign lands into slavery. To many, her name would have been forgotten. She was just another captive, another girl lost to the endless tide of bodies fed into the Sultan's harem. But Hürrem was different. Where others wept, she watched. Where others bowed, she smiled. Where others surrendered, she adapted. She studied every glance, every word, every ritual inside those gilded walls. Beneath her laughter, she hid steel. Behind her kindness, an iron will. And soon, she began to weave something no concubine had ever dared, an invisible net around the Sultan's heart. Suleiman returned from battlefields with blood still on his hands, yet it was her honeyed words that lingered in his ears. Viziers debated policy in marble halls, but her whispers in the quiet of night carried more weight than any council's decision. In a world ruled by armies, it was her voice, soft, patient, deliberate, that proved more powerful than steel. But power invites enemies. The Sultan's own mother, the formidable Velid Sultan, saw in Hürrem a dangerous threat to the order of the palace. Mahidevran, Suleiman's first consort and the mother of his eldest son, despised her growing influence. Around Hürrem, jealousy simmered, ambition clashed, and rivalry sharpened into daggers. In the harem, smiles were masks, gifts were traps, and every whispered word could kill. And behind the silken curtains, alliances shifted. One by one, her rivals began to vanish. Was it destiny that cleared her path? Or was it Hürrem's unseen hand, guiding the shadows to serve her will? For centuries, no concubine had ever been allowed to marry the Sultan. It was not just a rule, it was the foundation of Ottoman power. The Sultan was to be above all ties, bound to no woman, tied only to the empire itself. Yet Suleiman shattered that sacred tradition for her. Against all expectation, against centuries of law, he married Hürrem. A slave girl, once dragged in chains, was now his legal wife, his queen in all but name. The empire gasped in disbelief. The harem seethed with fury, and in that single moment, the balance of power shifted forever. From then on, Hürrem was no longer a whisper in the shadows. She became the voice beside the Sultan's throne, shaping decisions that would ripple across continents. She advised him in matters of state. She counseled him in moments of war. And slowly, her influence reached beyond the chambers of the harem, into the very heart of empire. And with her rise came blood. The mighty Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, once Suleiman's closest friend, his brother in all but name, fell. For years, Ibrahim ruled as if the empire were his own, his power growing unchecked. But one night, after a feast, the palace grew silent. Guards entered. By dawn, Ibrahim was dead, strangled, his name erased, his memory condemned. To the people, it was Suleiman's justice. But to many, it was Hürrem's revenge. And then came the greatest blow of all, the fall of Prince Mustafa. Brave, beloved, admired by soldiers, Mustafa was the hope of the empire. He was the warrior prince, the heir the people trusted, the son Suleiman once adored. Yet in the end, whispers condemned him. Letters accused him of treason. And when he entered his father's tent seeking honor, he found death instead. His guards seized him, a bowstring coiled around his neck. And in silence, the heir to the empire was gone. Soldiers wept. The people raged. The empire itself trembled. But what if Suleiman had never listened to her? Would Ibrahim Pasha have continued to strengthen the empire instead of perishing in the dark? Would Mustafa have led the Ottomans to even greater glory? Or was it Hürrem's hand that prevented the empire from collapsing under its own ambition? History does not answer, but her shadow remains. It began with the fall of a giant. Ibrahim Pasha, the Sultan's childhood friend, his most trusted Grand Vizier, rose higher than any man beside the throne. But power breeds envy, and whispers become daggers. One night, in the glittering halls of Topkapi, Ibrahim was summoned to a royal banquet. He feasted, he laughed, he toasted the empire, never knowing it would be his last night alive. By dawn, the vizier who once ruled the empire's affairs lay strangled, his name erased, his legacy buried in silence. But that was only the beginning. The true storm came years later, with Prince Mustafa. Brave, beloved, and adored by soldiers, he was the shining hope of the empire. To many, he was destiny itself. But to Hürrem, and perhaps even to Suleiman, he was a threat. The day of reckoning arrived. Mustafa entered his father's tent, expecting honor, or perhaps reconciliation. Instead, the air thickened with dread. Guards advanced. The prince resisted, fought desperately, but the bowstring wrapped around his neck sealed his fate. Moments later, the empire's brightest star lay lifeless on the ground. The silence that followed was more deafening than battle. In that single moment, Suleiman's world fractured. His soldiers wept, his people raged, and his throne, once unshakable, now trembled under the weight of betrayal, fear, and blood. But was this the will of Suleiman alone, or the shadow of Hürrem guiding his hand? History whispers, but the truth still lies hidden in the silk of the harem. After Mustafa's death, silence cloaked the empire. The soldiers who had once cheered their prince now marched with heavy hearts. In the markets of Istanbul, whispers grew louder, that the Sultan was no longer the master of his throne, that love had blinded him, and that the empire itself had been poisoned from within. Suleiman, once the lawgiver, stood more isolated than ever. His Grand Vizier was gone, his heir was gone, and at his side, only one voice remained, Hürrem's. She had not only secured her son's future, but rewritten the destiny of the dynasty itself. But her victory carried a hidden cost. The empire that once roared with unity now limped beneath suspicion and betrayal. The golden age still glimmered, but its light was fading into shadow. Hürrem Sultan's rise was nothing short of miraculous. A slave who became the most powerful woman of the empire, bending love, politics, and fate itself to her will. Yet in her triumph lay a curse. She preserved her bloodline, but planted the seeds of decline. And as history would tell, not even Suleiman the Magnificent could escape the storm she left behind. History remembers him as Suleiman the Magnificent, the conqueror, the lawgiver, the sultan who ruled the world. But behind the veil of the throne stood Hürrem Sultan, a woman who rewrote the rules of power, who rose from captivity to a crown. He wore the title, yet she shaped destiny. So the question remains, was it truly Suleiman's empire, or was it hers? Did she safeguard the dynasty, or plant the seeds of its decline? Was she the most powerful woman the Ottomans ever knew, or simply the sharpest player in a dangerous game? 4 centuries later, her shadow still lingers over the empire she helped shape and unravel. But the truth of who truly ruled remains a mystery.